Hi friends, Cathy Madeo back with another video. This one all about what it means to engage your core and how doing so can radically change your yoga practice. If you feel clumsy in your yoga practice, or you've ever wondered how some of those yoga practitioners just glide with grace and ease from one pose to the next, then this video is definitely for you. You might think it has to do with being flexible, but learning how to move with control and ease has less to do with being super flexible and more to do with learning how to engage your core. In this video, I'm going to share with you exactly what it means to engage your core and how engaging your core in your yoga poses and the transitions between yoga poses can radically change your yoga practice and the way you move off of your mat. Let's get started. When people say engage your core, they're most likely talking about turning on your transverse abdominis muscle. This is our deepest muscle of the core. It looks and works like a corset. It basically wraps around your entire torso and cinches in at the waist. The interesting thing about the TVA is that it doesn't need any movement to engage. Most of our other muscles will need the bones to move to actually shorten the muscle. But the TVA is kind of like a class all of its own. So this is why you can actually engage your core while doing a lot of movements that don't necessarily look like ab crunches or core work. So I want you to place a few of your fingers, 2 fingers below your navel and 2 fingers roughly out to the side. And then just gently press into your abdomen and do a short cough. Do you feel a kind of tightness right there as you cough? That's your transverse abdominis. Now, the transverse abdominis is much bigger here, but it's a little bit easier to feel here. And if you need to move some tissue around or anything, please put those fingers deeply into your stomach. When your transverse abdominis is engaged, it feels like a kind of bracing, like something is just holding all of the contents in the torso in. And basically what's happening is the transverse abdominis is pressurizing this area to protect the spine when we do big movements. Let's say we're picking up a heavy box or something like that. Another one of its function is to move our limbs, so the arms and the legs, with force. So we can just throw a ball out of our hand, right? But if we initiate the movement from our core, we're going to get a lot more power coming out of that ball, right? But let's see this in action in our yoga practice. Take a very common transition that we have, especially in our vinyasa classes, where we have downward facing dog as a kind of base, and we're going to step the foot in between the hands to move up to any standing posture. Most people that haven't learned how to engage their core will feel a little bit clumsy or unable to do this transition with grace, especially as they try to step the foot in between the hands and lift their torso up. But now if we look at this transition and simply add in core engagement, you'll notice that it's a much more controlled movement that looks like it's done with more ease. You'll also notice there's a lot more stability in the transition. But your TVA alone does not make up your core. There are a lot of muscles in your torso that help you move. Let's take the rectus abdominis, commonly known as those washboard abs. Our rectus abdominis, which are our most superficial front core muscles, along with the TVA, are responsible for core compression, namely just bringing your torso into your thighs. So any movement that we have, like stepping the foot in between the hands, if you notice that's a core compression move, the chest is going in towards the thigh, or take any forward fold in the yoga practice, that is, again, a compression move. So the stronger and the more engaged we can get our rectus abdominis, as well as using the transverse abdominis in these movements, the deeper our forward folds. So let's watch this stepping the foot forward in between our hands from downward facing dog one more time, thinking about this. We're essentially taking a number of poses here. We're going from a three-legged downward facing dog, and then we're pulling the knee into the chest, and that's where we're using our rectus abdominis, our transverse abdominis, also of course our hip flexors to flex the thigh in towards the chest. And then from there, we're placing the foot in between the hands. From there, we rise up, and we're using our back core muscles there to lift the torso up and basically extend the spine straight up, our spinal erectors. Basically apply this concept to most of our yoga poses. Let's take the external and internal obliques, two more core muscles that work together to both laterally or side bend our torso or rotate the spine into twists. Now these muscles on both sides of the torso kind of work together. So when one side shortens, the opposite side stretches. And let's take a side bend. So again, I can side bend and that's going to just happen automatically, or I can actively engage and shorten one side of the obliques to stretch and lengthen the opposite side even more. Same with twists. Of course, I can just kind of take my hands and pull my torso and rotate my spine to twist, but you'll notice I'm not getting as deep as if I recruit those external and internal obliques that are responsible for rotating the spine. Of course, we have core muscles on our backside. So we have two main groups of muscles. One is the multifidus that kind of run along the vertebrae, and the other is the rector spinae, which are three big bands of muscles that run along the spine. And they both work to keep us upright. So they're spinal extensors. So really in all of our back bends, we need to engage these muscles in order to extend the spine. Now, if we take a pose like locust pose, which is more of a gentle back bend done in this way, but it's really a great yoga pose to both help strengthen the back and prepare your body for back bends. Now, I can come into locust pose here by just lifting my arms and my legs. But if I use my back core muscles and I engage them and I activate them, you'll notice I get much more of a lift. So let's translate how we would use our back core muscles in a yoga transition. Let's go back to that downward facing dog, stepping our foot forward. So again, we already know we're going to engage those front core muscles as we pull the thigh into the chest and place the foot in between the hands. But as we begin to lift the torso up, we can call upon those back core muscles to help lift up with control. And then as we come up, we can brace our transverse abdominis a little bit to help stabilize everything. So this, again, is one of those transitions that is so commonly done throughout your yoga practice. And if you can begin to really turn on these core muscles, you'll begin to move with so much more control. One more muscle to consider in our core muscles is the pelvic floor. Now, the pelvic floor is a diamond band shape of muscles at the base of your torso, whose job is basically to keep all your organs inside. Some of us might know how to engage this core muscle by doing something for females called a Kegel, or for both male and female, it's essentially the muscle we use to hold in our pee. You might not think using this muscle would help in common standing poses or yoga postures in your practice, but let's take Warrior 2 for example. Here I am doing Warrior 2 without any core activation, and notice how it subtly changes as I engage my pelvic floor muscles. And then I turn on my front core muscles a little bit to prevent my front ribs from flaring. Let's take another standing posture like our side angle. So in side angle, here I am again coming into the pose, just kind of using my flexibility and my mobility. But now what happens when I turn on my core muscles? Here I go using my pelvic floor muscles. Notice how that shifts my pelvis. It almost locks my pelvis into a more stable position. And now, because this is a side bending posture, I begin to use my obliques a little bit more, and notice how much more rotation and side bending I get in this pose. Let's take a posture like crow pose now. I can get into this pose by just simply knowing the biomechanics of how to balance and having a decent foundation of strength in my body. But now what happens when I turn on my core muscles? So first I engage my pelvic floor muscles. You'll notice my pelvis kind of lifts up, which initiates my limbs to move. You'll notice I pulled my heels in towards my hips. And then as I turn on my rectus abdominis and my transverse abdominis more, my shoulder blades begin to spread apart and protract more, and the whole pose now has lift. You might be thinking, this is all great, Cathy, but I don't have a strong core. I've got you. I have a free core ebook called Activate Your Core, where I share with you what I think are the top core exercises you should be doing to get a strong core on all sides of your torso. Just head to the description box to get your free ebook or click the link above. Now listen, you don't need to be engaging your core and bracing your core all of the time that you move, right? We don't want to be like super tight and wound up all the time. So what you want to learn is when best to brace and engage your core, when to use which core muscles, and how to leverage that activation in your yoga practice to move with more control. So stay tuned for my next video, which will be a practice along class where we'll go through and use all of these concepts in a full class. I'll see you in the next video.